in competitive attention environments, you tend towards the sort of lowest common denominator of compelled attention. So like, what does Times Square look like? And why does Times Square look the way it looks? Well, Times Square is a place where people's attention is being fought over in a very competitive marketplace. And so you get bright lights and interruptions, the same of a casino floor, right? Increasingly, all competitive attention markets look like that. And they work against other forms of communication or media that look different.
Now that it's not just that you can walk into Times Square and you're being assailed by all of these different things that are competing for your attention. Now you can walk with your phone, and your phone is like, I'm thinking about that article that came out, I guess, a few months ago about how college students can't read a book. Like, they're just not trained to sustain attention long enough to be able to finish a lengthy reading assignment. And so it's sort of revamp the entire structure of curricula, even in higher education. Are we making ourselves dumber with smartphones and other technology?
I think we almost certainly are. And I think that, you know, the experience of Times Square, or the experience of the casino floor, like, is increasingly the experience of inner life. And to be clear here, we're talking about 6, 7, 8 hours a day, depending like who's doing the measuring. Like, this idea that, I think 10 years ago, more and more, you can make this distinction between IRL, like get offline, go touch grass, and, you know, the internet. Like, the internet was one sphere, IRL was another sphere, and those spheres kind of contacted each other throughout the day. Now it's like, there's no distinction really between the two. It's one seamless lived reality. And that seamless lived reality is most of our waking time, or a sizable portion, for some most, some half, some slightly less than half, is spent in a competitive attention market whose job is to extract our attention whether we want it to or not, and then to sell that attention to some third party. And that is going to have profound effects on what we can do with the sort of miracle and gift that our attention is.
Yeah. So will you say a little bit more about that, Chris? The kind of the way that our entire social and political and economic order has been restructured around attention. And I think, you know, you make this really profound point in the book about the difference between getting and keeping attention. So can you walk through that?
Yeah. So, you know, we have these sort of two faculties for attention. One's voluntary and one's involuntary. And the involuntary one is the root of what attention is, because if you're walking across the street, scrolling through your phone, and a car honks because it's about to hit you, the whole point, the thing that attention has to do from an evolutionary perspective, is to wrench you away from the phone towards the thing that's about to put you in danger, right? So the reason we have this faculty is so that we can recognize danger. It is so that we can be interrupted in some deep sense. So involuntary attention, which is, you know, the wail of a siren down the street, the crying of a baby on a flight, the honk of the horn of the car, or a waiter dropping a tray of glasses, that's one form of attention. The other form of attention is voluntary, right? Which is, you're deciding right now as you're listening to this podcast that you want to listen to this podcast, and you're putting your focus on it right now. The issue is that if you're in competitive attention markets, it's much easier to grab someone's attention than to hold it. So think about it this way. Almost any person, if there was a room, let's say an auditorium of 1,000 people, and you said, look, your job is to go in there, get on that stage, and just get everyone's attention. Like, anyone can do that. It's sort of trivially easy. Like, where anyone who's ever raised their glass and hit the fork against it to be like, hey, everyone, toast time, right? Like, you can get attention very easily. But if you said, okay, your assignment is to go into that theater of 1,000 people and hold their attention for an hour, well, that's a much, much more difficult proposition. Because it's easier to grab than to hold, what it means is competitive attention markets tend to drive towards iterative grabbing of attention. I call this in the book the slot machine model, right? People legendarily will sit at slot machines for 6, 8, 10, or 12 hours. They're not being told a story, right? There's no narrative arc. They're not spellbound by their attention being held. Instead, the slot machine is taking 3-second bites of interruption and repeated interruption. This sense of selecting in competitive attention markets for iterative interruption that is what the infinite scroll of the internet now has become. I mean, I don't even think it's an accident that its actual interface is like a slot machine. Like, I mean, it's scrolling in front of you. You're sort of like awaiting the dopamine hit of the cherries, which is like the funny video or some, something that's provocative or interesting or titillating or whatever it is. And so you have this selection effect because it's speaking to some deep part of our wiring, right? And the comparison I use in the book is the same way that, we have certain evolutionary inheritances when it comes to our appetites that are exploited by companies like Coca-Cola or McDonald's, which can sell their product anywhere in the world, right? In any context, you can get people to drink sugary water because there's a deep part of us that reacts to that. There's something similar happening with attention and what happens to attention capitalism when it's deployed at scale. And remember, the scale we're talking about here, Meta's got 2 billion users, right? Like ByteDance has something in that universe, billions of users. I mean, this is on a scale that almost no corporation has ever been selling a product at.
Now, it's not a book that's about Donald Trump, and you spend most of the book not talking about Donald Trump, but then you have to. And so, he is in some ways like this kind of product of an paradigmatic exemplar of the kind of attention age figure. And you talk a bit about Elon Musk as well in the book. So can you just talk through the way you discuss those two really important players in the book? And then maybe let us know, has your thinking about either of them changed, right? So you finished writing the book a year plus ago. I'm trying to remember the exact timeline, but obviously there have been a lot of developments involving both Trump, who has become president again, and Musk, who is, bought Twitter. I think he was purchasing Twitter and newly running it as you were kind of putting the galleys of the book to bed.
So I think in Trump's case, this is someone who recognized very early on how powerful attention is. Also, one of the things that distinguishes attention from other forms of human relations is that it can be positive or negative. Like, there's no such thing as really like negative care or negative love, right? Like negative reciprocity. Like, the things that we think of as positive aspects of human relationships are positive, but attention can be negative or positive. I mean, someone can be screaming at you on the subway, or they can be flirting with you, and like those are both forms of attention. Donald Trump is such a, I think, just profoundly broken person at such a deep and feral level that he doesn't really distinguish between them, where he wants attention so badly that he's willing to take negative attention in ways that are truly kind of pathological and unnatural for most people who don't like negative attention. But I think via this deep instinctual aspect of his personality, he made the discovery that attention is basically the most important resource. And if you collect it to yourself, you collect tremendous amounts of power. I think Elon Musk didn't start out with the same brokenness of Donald Trump, but he got it somehow. I think by being online too much. Like, I literally think Twitter broke him profoundly, and he became addicted to attention in a way that was totally compulsive and pathological, but also led him to the same insight that I think Trump had, which is about the power of attention and even negative attention, that if you collect enough attention, and even if it's negative, you aggregate power to yourself. I do think that his arc is really interesting to study in contrast to Trump, because I think Trump has natural charisma, which I think, aids him in a way that Elon Musk is like the opposite of charisma. He's like the least charismatic human being I've ever encountered. He's like a negative void of charisma. He's just...
Have you met Sam Alito?
You're right. Actually, Alito is in a very similar category. And so I think that they have the same insight and some of the same pathologies, but ultimately, like, Trump has like a natural talent for getting attention in a way that Elon Musk doesn't. His is born purely of the kind of pathologies and addictions of his very obviously and documented addiction to social media, which he posts on all hours of the day and night.
I feel like you are channeling Bane. You merely adopted the dark. I was
Yes.
born in it, molded by it. As you were talking, okay, you've talked both in interviews about the book, but also the book itself, about how part of your job was kind of staying on top of rapidly developing news, and how that kind of forced you into this world of attention and the attention economy. And I guess I wanted to ask for your advice, because I feel like a lot of what people are being asked to do right now is to stay tuned into politics, right, and engage in public information and public education. And these situations can be quite rapidly developing, like as a vote is unfolding, right, and people are all of a sudden calling on you, right, to call certain representatives and whatnot. So how do you balance, the competing demands of like this rapidly evolving political hellscape in which we all need to be tuned into, right, and participating in and informing ourselves and others about, with the reality that, of course, right, in order to form deeper engagement and engage in deeper thinking, you need to check out of that at some points and like toggle back and forth between the two?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I mean, I would say my first answer is just like, if you listen to Strict Scrutiny, Why Is This Happening, watch All In, and then like make some time to read Lawless and The Sirens Call. Like that's a good comprehensive
the media
set
diet you need
of information sources. No, it's
and Kate's New York Times op-eds.
Yes, I mean obviously when Kate pops up in the New York Times, you got to read that too. But no, I think that fundamentally it's a great question. I mean, I tell people this, which is kind of an admission against interest, which is that like, you don't really need to follow the news all day, every day. I think, one thing I think about is like, there's a kind of a natural logic to the idea of morning news radio and then the morning paper, or you read the paper later that day when you get home. There used to be, back in the day, there'd be morning papers and evening papers. Morning paper and the evening news is another combo you could do, right? Like, I do think that setting time aside where you actually pay attention to the news and try to digest it in some way that is more than just the kind of barrage does make kind of sense. And I do think the constant plugged in can have kind of diminishing returns after a certain point, even though obviously, from the perspective of my like employer, like it's better if people watch our network all day, which I get, but I do think that I do think there can be diminishing returns. And I do think setting time aside, I mean, one little thing I write about in the book, which I do think is interesting, is reading the physical paper is so much better than reading it online or reading it mediated through social media. I saw this really funny thing the other day where like the Sunday shows all did rounds of interviews where there was a lot of questions about Zohran Mamdani, and some Democrats said some pretty bad stuff about him, and that got clipped and it went viral. And I saw people like, why are Democrats paying it? Like, they're about to pass this terrible bill, and why are Democrats only talking about Zohran Mamdani? It's like, if you go back to the interviews, like there were tons of exchanges about the bill. The thing that got people's attention was the controversy around Mamdani, which then got clipped. But the actual original source of the interview was not just about Zohran Mamdani. In fact, it spent a lot of time on the bill. And one thing that happens is, when you get information and news totally mediated by social media, you can lose that context very, very easily, which is why I think that like doing things like reading the newspaper or like, listening to Strict Scrutiny, all the way through, even about cases that are not like the big cases, is actually just a really useful way to get information.